Hey, I'm Mads Torgersen. I'm a PM on the .NET team, and I'm responsible for language design of C#.
Hi, I'm Casey Uhlenhut. I'm a program manager on the .NET and Visual Studio team at Microsoft, specifically working on .NET developer experiences inside the IDE. Mads and I are here to talk to you today about the productivity improvements that we've added to Visual Studio 2017. So we're going to dive into some of those productivity features, and then Mads is going to wrap us off by introducing us to C# 7. So this demo code is probably going to look a little familiar from the keynote you saw me do this morning, and that's because it's the same. But instead, we're now going to dive deeper into those features that I showed to show you how you can be productive in Visual Studio 2017. The real productivity add that VS 2017 adds is that now you don't have to lose the context of your development to make major code changes quickly and confidently. So the first thing I want to do is, I'm a developer, I have this code where it's helping me tweak my bike workouts, and I just want to make sure all my tests are passing before I submit this for review. So perhaps the most exciting feature in Visual Studio 2017 is actually live unit testing. I can turn this on by going to Test, Live Unit Testing, Start. Live unit testing is constantly running my unit test in the background and then updating these icons that you're seeing on the left-hand margin to let me know the status of my code. For example, a red X means that this line of code is hit by at least one failing test. A green check means this line of code is hit by all passing tests. And a blue dash means that this line of code is not covered by any tests at all, and I should probably write a unit test for it. I can click on an icon to see exactly which tests hit each line, and I can hover over a failing test to see my actual and expected values. And I can directly click on a test to navigate right to it. At this point, there's probably some of you who are like, whoa, you're continuously running all of my tests in the background? Like, that's crazy. I have thousands of tests. So what we've done for you folk is we have in the Solution Explorer, you can come over here and right-click on any test project and adjust which tests are included in your live test set. That means you can include or exclude any test project and restrict your live set to only those. Once you do this, you can come over to the Test Explorer and see what your live test set actually is. I'm going to go back into full screen mode so we can see more code. So again, here is my failing test. I don't know why it's failing, so we're just going to go ahead and start debugging it. You'll remember that when I hovered over it, it showed me I was throwing a null reference exception, and sure enough, I've thrown one. But I want to know, what was null? And this is where the new exception helper comes in handy in Visual Studio 2017. So not only do I know that I've thrown a null reference exception, but at the top level, we've put the most important information, which is which expression was returning null. And so here I can clearly see it's notes that's returning null, and I can continue my investigation from there. Now that I know that this can actually be null, I actually want to see if there's anywhere else in my code before I fix it where I'm accessing a member of notes that I need to add a unit test for. So to do this, I'm going to do Shift F12 or Find All References. You'll notice that this is completely different. No longer is Find All References a simple, flat list. In Visual Studio 2017, we've colorized the results, so it's easier to read because you're just reading code now. And we allow you to have your own custom hierarchy, which is a feature that customers have asked us for a while, and now we allow you to have your own hierarchy of results, which is especially helpful when you have a ton of results in here. I can quickly glance through this, see the only member of notes I ever access is length, and I have a test for that. It's currently failing. So I'm just going to navigate directly to where I initialize notes. Here I can see that I never actually checked that notes was null, so I'm going to quickly add in this null check. And when I do this, you'll notice that IntelliSense is looking a little different. If I zoom in here, you can see that we've added this tray of icons across the bottom of our completion list to allow you to filter your items by category. I also note that there's an intuitive keyboard shortcut associated with every filter. So for example, interfaces is Alt-I, classes, Alt-C, so on and so forth, which makes it easy for you when you're a keyboard user to just quickly filter your list. Also, this is super helpful when you're learning a complex API. Say you're trying to learn Roslyn and you know that you need a property. You can quickly filter by properties and then start guessing the name of what you're looking for easily here. Or if you're working WPF and you're looking for only events, you can quickly filter by events. Or if you're one of those developers that hates extension methods, because there is a group of them out there, gotta do what you gotta do, you can filter all of those directly out. So again, I can finish typing this by using camel case matching and then continue typing my expression. You'll notice that live unit testing on the left-hand side is figuring out what code was, or what tests were impacted by this code change I made. It's running those tests for me without me having to go to Test Explorer or manually click any button. And it's updating the icons in line in the context of my development to let me know that all my tests are now passing. Woohoo! Now that I'm green everywhere, I want to clean up my code before I submit this for review. So something you may notice is I have multiple types in this file, and that's because I'm the type of developer where I write everything in one file, and then later I'll pull it all out if my team makes me. So my team actually does believe every type should be in its own file. So rather than cutting and pasting and adding a new item and all this stuff, Visual Studio 2017 has added a ton of new refactorings to make this super easy for me. So now I can access a refactoring with Control Dot, and you can see that it's telling me I can move this type to a file with the same name. And again, in a single click, boom, it's gone. I know there's another type up here, but I don't really remember what it is. So I can use the now built-in indent guides to hover over these dotted lines and see that I also have a type workout in here. So I got to get that guy out of there. So scroll up, press Control Dot, and again, I can move it right out of there. So Visual Studio 2017 has a ton of new refactorings. I don't have time to go through all of them, but I do have time to show you two more really quickly. So you notice that my file and my type name are out of sync now. My type is bike workouts, the plural form, whereas my file name is the singular form. So rather than having to go to the Solution Explorer and rename them, I can just, again, with a single button press, do Control Dot, and I have two options. I can rename my file to match my type, or I can rename my type to match my file. And in one click, it updates it for me. So now my type is matching my file name. Also, say that I started to do a lot of logic in this property and I want to convert it to a method. Again, Control Dot accesses all the refactorings available, and it's telling me I could convert this property to a method. Now that I've done some refactorings and cleaned my code up a bit, I just want to make sure I'm following my team's code style. So I need to quickly navigate back to that original method I was working in. To do this, rather than hunt through Solution Explorer or all my open tabs, I can use Control T, which is Go to All. It's also triggered with Control Comma if you're used to this feature in previous versions of Visual Studio. Go to All allows me to quickly navigate to any file, type, member, or symbol declaration from a single location. So I know here I'm looking for a member, so I'm going to use the query syntax M to filter it by members. And then I can start typing in the name of my method. And again, in a click, I'm instantly there. All my tests are passing, I've refactored. And so now you're probably noticing these pink dots. These are code suggestions. Code suggestions are something new we've added to Visual Studio 2017 to hint best practices or alternate coding patterns to developers. I can investigate these with Control Dot. You're probably sensing a theme here with Control Dot. And you can see that's suggesting that I add braces to this if statement to make it perhaps more readable. And I can apply it by pressing Enter. If you're looking closely at this code, you're probably noticing that the var here is squiggled with an error squiggle. If I investigate this, it's telling me to use the explicit type instead of var. I'm sure Mads can give you lots of information on var versus explicit type, but we don't have time for that today. Suffice it to say that my team believes you should always use the explicit type to promote readability and understanding. And so again, I can commit this, and now I'm adhering to my team's code style. In fact, in Visual Studio 2017, we support custom coding conventions where any team can configure and enforce their code style rules with an editor config file. Editor config is an open source file format, and we've worked with their community to have it also support .NET code style. You can see here is my team's var preferences. For all I know, Mads is shaking his head about this var stuff. You can see that we choose to not prefer var, which is why we have false, And if we do see a violation of this rule, so if you do use var in the editor, we're going to squiggle it as a warning inside the editor. Alternately, my team could choose to make this a suggestion or an error if we want to be a real stickler for the rules. I'm just going to go ahead and change it to a suggestion. If I change this to a suggestion, you'll start to see that my vars are annotated with pink dots rather than green squiggles. So unfortunately, if you do change an editor config file, you do have to reopen any files that were already open. So now I just have to open back my athlete class. And as I scroll through, you'll note that now my uses of var are suggestions with the pink dots. And so this is how you can drive consistency across your repositories and your team by using an editor config file. We also allow you to have multiple editor config files, so they apply based on the directory that they're in. So if you look at my Solution Explorer, I have an editor config at the solution directory level, which applies to all projects in that directory. But I can overwrite it by having an editor config in another directory that's closer. So for example, my team doesn't really care if you use var in your unit tests. In fact, we actually prefer it. And so here I've overwritten those var preferences in my test project. And so that's where the true power of editor config comes, where you can customize your coding conventions. This whole time, I want to bring up that I've been using Mads Kirstenson's editor config language service extension. And so that's where you're getting these nice features like colorization. It's showing you what folder your editor config file is in. It's telling me down here that I'm inheriting from another editor config, etc. So recommend you install that as well. All right, so let's just go back to where I was before. And now we've seen how you can use code style to help enforce consistency across your team. And these suggestions are really helpful for doing so if you don't want to be super strict about it. And also these coding suggestions that we've added are helpful for learning new language features. And so now that I adhere to my code style in this thing, I've refactored it, I just want to show my team, because we moved to the next version of C# that I've listened, I've upgraded. So Mads is now going to walk us through all the new features in C# 7 to help make you help maintain your code base and make everything more readable.
All right, thanks. Yeah, so later when Casey's not looking, I'm going to change those explicit types back to vars. But for now, let's go through and apply some of the new C# 7 language features, and also use control dot a lot in order to realize some of the new coding patterns that you can upgrade to if you're adopting the new version of the language. So a lot of the C# 7 language features are sort of about how you work with data in the small, how data flows and how your control flows around the different kinds of data and so on. And I'll show a few examples of that. There are many more features in C# 7, but these are probably the most important ones that'll impact your code a lot. So if you look at this method here, it's clear that we are trying to get two results out of this method. There's both a workout and there's the calorie count that's associated with the workout. They both come out as results. And so we did the best we could. In early versions of C#, we returned a system.tuple of those two types, and we create a tuple down here and return it. But in C# 7, you can do better. You can actually, we have language support directly for tuples, so you can actually write a tuple type with this new syntax, just comma-separated types with parens around them. And now that means return a tuple of workout and double. And the way I create one of those tuple values is just to give a tuple expression, which is also a bunch of expressions, commas between, parens around. So you sense a theme here of the syntactic style that we are opting for. If we go back to the method down here that calls get week's best workout, you can see that we hover over the result and we indeed get a tuple back. The places where we use the elements of the tuple, item 2 and item 1 here, still work because the built-in tuples still allow the item 1 and item 2 that are also in system.tuple. We kind of kept consistency there. But it's not a very good way of consuming results because you don't really know what they mean. You can probably work out what workout means, but why am I getting this double? What does it mean? And so we allow you to also put names on tuple elements. So the workout we could just call workout, just to eliminate any source of doubt. And here we can say calories And now we've added names to the tuple type returned from the method. And indeed, if we hover here, we can see it now has names. If we take the suggestion, much as I'd prefer not to, and actually expand the type, the var to the explicit type, you can see here that it's got the names inside of the type here as well. It's still allowed to use item 1 and item 2 to then get the elements out, but you now see suggestions popping up saying, maybe you want to use those explicit names that you just provided. And indeed, you can dot in using those nice names instead of the item 1 and item 2 names for better readability of your code. So this is starting to look really good. I now know exactly how to interpret the stuff I get back in a tuple. It's kind of a little bit annoying still to pick it up in a tuple just so I can dot in and get the individual elements out later. I can do it even better if I want to with what we call a deconstruction. A deconstruction, I should say before I go there that tuples like these are also in Visual Basic, and they work the same way. They just have a syntax that's more natural for Visual Basic. So if you're out there wondering, is this in Visual Basic? Yes, tuples are in Visual Basic as well. But I want to deconstruct my tuple as it comes back. So let me delete the local variable name here. And now what I have instead is a deconstruction where I declare 2 local variables, workout and calories, and then take the tuple that I assign to this deconstruction, split it up, and assign each of the elements to each of the local variables. So now you see there's no longer a best, but if I delete it here, there's directly a calories local variable in scope that contains one of those elements and a best that contains the other one. So that's really nice. Now my code flows nicely. I just want to call out as a var lover who was a little offended by what you did before, that these local variables, like other local variables that are initialized, can actually be declared with var. And I can actually, as someone who's super lazy, I can actually do it even shorter. There's a shorthand for if all of them are vars, you don't have to say var n times. You can just say var once and for all up front here, and that means infer the types of all these tuple elements and give them the names mentioned in here.
You're going to start a tweet war about var versus explicit type with all this.
Maybe, but then what else is new, you know? So tuples, deconstruction helps you structure code when you have multiple return values, can also be used when you have dictionaries with keys that have multiple elements in them and so on. Tuple types are very useful in general. Let's go and look at something else here. I noticed you have, you kept returning to this tweet today's workout method here. And one thing that's going on here is that you're getting yourself a workout for today, and then you're doing various things depending on what's in this variable. And I'm getting a nice suggestion here around where you're checking if the workout is a bike workout. So you're doing a type test, which is a little clunky in C# today because first you use this asterisk here, where first you declare a local variable, see if the thing becomes null when you try to look at it as a bike workout, and if it isn't, then, well, it probably was a bike workout.
Right.
The suggestion that I'm getting here is to do that more easily by inlining this temporary variable. So let's see what that looks like. It uses so it removes the temporary variable, and instead it inlines an is expression inside of the if condition here. So the as is gone and the declaration outside is gone. But this is expression looks a little different from the is expressions you're used to. It has a type here like usual, but it also has a variable name. So this type variable name thing here is called a pattern. This is a type pattern, and there are some other patterns in C#7 that you can specify, and we expect to add more patterns over time to C#. But this is kind of a new concept that we're adding. And the pattern here says, if today's workout is a bike workout, then call it bike, and you're able to use it as a bike workout here in the then branch of the if. So you can see the local variable is introduced here. If this is actually true, there's a bike workout in it, and you can use it in the then branch there. So let's go and also nice up the next one here, which does the same, but for distance workout. Inline temporary variable, and it's now using this new variant of the is expression with a pattern. But since all of this code here towards the end of the method is sort of testing today's workout and choosing what to do based on that, this feels more like a kind of a switching situation. And indeed, you can now use switch statements on anything you want in C#. So for instance, I can switch on today's workout, even though it's not a primitive type. You can switch on anything now in C#. And I want to try to take this logic that follows and put it inside of a switch statement instead. So the first one is easy, nothing surprising here. I'm testing whether it is a certain constant value, and if it is, I'm going to return null here. What's more interesting is that case clauses can now contain patterns as well as constants. So, and indeed, constants are patterns in this new sort of view of the world. So I can go and take this first pattern that I used down here in an is expression, and I can choose instead to use that in the, there we go, in the case statement here to much the same effect. So I'm saying if the thing coming in matches the pattern, do the thing that follows. The pattern just happens to be a type pattern introducing a byte local variable that I can then use in this case body here. So I get much more expressiveness in my case, and it essentially becomes a place where you do things based on what's up with this guy, like what certain things being true about it. I could even, if I wanted to, I could put further conditions on here. I can actually put a Boolean expression saying when byte.something is greater than whatever. So there's a lot of expressiveness in case statements here. Let's go and grab the next one as well. So case, the next pattern here was distance workout. There you go. Put a colon on there, get it indented, remove the curlies, get more indentation, and it's starting to flow like a switch would. And we could even take the stuff here that happens if nothing else happens, and just to illustrate, we could pull it up in a default clause. Let's move it up a line here, put the missing curlies at the end of the switch, and now you can see that this thing that I observed in the beginning, that the last bit is really about what is today's workout, what does it look like, and choosing your next course of action based on that. That's really expressed very clearly in the code now with a switch statement. So that was pattern matching in a nutshell. One last feature I would like to show is local functions. So this is more of a convenience feature, I will say, but let's have a look. Here in Tweetify, I'm taking a string and I'm trying to make a tweet out of it. So it has to be 140 characters long, no more. So if it is short enough, I cycle here and I try to add more hashtags on randomly.
As many hashtags as possible.
As many hashtags as possible. So this is essentially a teenager emulator. And I will, and I essentially call this helper method try add hashtag, which has to take some of my method state here. It has to take my string builder and my random generator and use that to see if it can fit in one more hashtag. And I'm going to loop around as long as it can. But this helper method here, even though it kind of sits at the same level as the method using it, it really belongs to that method, and it's not supposed to be used by anyone else. It doesn't make sense to anyone else. So what you can do now is you can make it a local function by simply moving it into the method that uses it. So I'm now declaring it inside of the other method. And that's totally fine now, except there are a few things we need to fix up. First of all, it's a local function. So like a local variable, it can't have explicit accessibility declared on it. And one more thing that you notice is that it's complaining that I'm using the names SB and random again here because they're already in scope from the enclosing method. Well, great. They're in scope. That means I don't actually need to even pass them in the first place because they're already there available for me. So I can just delete my parameters and rely, and my arguments here corresponding to that, and rely on the fact that that information is already available in the enclosing scope. So just like lambda expressions, if you're used to those, it has access to local variables of the enclosing scope. Finally, I just want to call out that we are having, in this case, the local function sits after it's actually being called. It's being called up here, but declared down here, and that's totally fine. They don't have to be declared before they're used. They can indeed actually, like here, even sit in an unreachable part of the method. You just stick them somewhere in the method. I could stick it, I can move it up here before it's called, that's fine. If I move it too far up, then it's going to appear before the local variables that it closes over, and you can never use a local variable before it's declared. So it's going to start complaining there. But other than that, you're free to put your local functions where they don't get in the way. And I do that here at the end. So, and I also, so you saw I used control dot a lot to helped me understand what I could do with the new language features here.
Right.
But you also notice that it's actually now easy to be green.
Right.
My live unit testing kept me on track all the time, made sure that I didn't break anything as I was mucking around with the new features.
And that's where really the real value of live unit testing comes in. Like, even if you're not a test-driven developer, as you're typing code, you can see if any change you make breaks your unit tests and causes one of them to fail immediately as you're developing. And so that kind of instant feedback is what really saves you time and effort as you're developing. So these were just some of the productivity features we've added to Visual Studio 2017. We're pretty pumped about it, so we're excited to hear what you think. And don't forget to download Visual Studio 2017 today to play with all of this goodness.
All right, so there are some questions here for you guys, and so I want to make sure that you get this. By the way, all questions, we want to answer these questions. There's 5 minutes after every session where we answer questions. And I have this handy-dandy tag board because I'm going to pretend I'm a fancy news guy. Is that okay with you guys?
So fancy.
All right,
Pretend
so
is always okay.
here are some questions. And the first one is from Paul Michaels. It says, are test and code style features being demoed in all versions or enterprise only?
That is a great question. So code style enforcement and configuration is in all versions of Visual Studio 2017, but the live unit testing feature is in enterprise only.
Okay, so now it looks like you did start a VAR war.
Oh dear.
So from Francesco, he says, why should we prefer VAR? What are the advantages of using VAR as opposed to not?
Well, this has been a discussion raging for approximately a century. And we were just sort of playing out a disagreement here because it really is up to the team. You trade some things off. VAR, many people prefer VAR when it's obvious what the type is because then they don't have to spend a lot of time writing out a long generic type, and it also doesn't break your flow of reading to kind of stumble over a big type in the middle of there. What's it doing there? Why do I need to? On the other hand, it does tell you what you're working on, and so if that's not obvious, it's really useful. So it really depends on the context and also on what style your team prefers.
Right.
But there are pros and cons to both,
Yeah,
to be quite honest.
That's what the code style feature is all about, so that you and your team can decide what you all prefer. And it's not us telling you what you should prefer. You can decide on your own.
But I am on the right side of history.
According to Jason here, there is no VAR war. Matt Sorgensen is on the right side of history. Here is another question from Martin. So is there finally a standard exception to throw in the default clause? Oh, so is there a finally? So I think he's talking about the case statements. Remember we talked about that a little bit. I guess I don't know what he's asking. Martin, you'll have to. Can you parse anything out of this?
I don't know that. Maybe he wants an exception that's specific to where you are in a default clause and you weren't supposed to be there.
Okay.
But I think the thinking is that it's not really the consumer of the method can't really know that you failed because you were in a default clause. So you pick whichever exception makes sense for the situation as seen from the outside.
Okay.
I don't know if that answers the intent of the question.
Here's a question from Ahmed. He says, type pattern matching instead of case statements, can we have in the editor config to not allow doing that as an option?
Yes, so all the features that you just saw Mads use as suggestions can all be configured in an editor config file if your team wants to prefer them or not. Yeah.
Okay. So I was watching, but I had to go get a drink. Tell me about editor config. Is it a way for me to enforce like the squiggly line?
Yes.
Okay, tell me a little bit more about that. What kinds of things can I put in there?
We allow you to write your own custom naming conventions in editor config. You can set your code style, so that's var preferences, this dot preferences, and things like that. And we also allow formatting as well. And we have documentation on docs.microsoft.com for editor config and what you can write in there.
Fantastic. Any final words before we head into the next session?
Download this thing and start playing and tell us what you think and tell us what we can do even better next time.
Fantastic. And you know what? We did a video, me and Mads, in my office where we actually rewrote some of my code using C#7 stuff. And so I'll put that out hopefully later this week. Coming up, by the way, we have next new debugging tips for Visual Studio 2017. After that, we have native Android, iOS, and Windows development in C# with Xamarin. Make sure you ask your questions because this is probably the best part. We're going to be asking your questions that come up on this tag board, so make sure you submit those. And with that, we're going to go to a little break, or maybe we'll just go right over to the other side of our Channel 9 studio to talk a little bit about new debugging tips for Visual Studio 2017.